The fire burned more than her face. It burned the life he refused to see. Years later, he returns to find her unshakable, unstoppable, and his own daughter staring at him with eyes that mirror his guilt. Hello and a very warm welcome from all of us at Mr. James' family. We are so happy to have you here today. This story is full of emotions, surprises, and unforgettable moments. We kindly request you to watch till the very end. Every second is crafted to keep you hooked, and we promise you won't want to miss a thing. The fire didn't begin with flames. It began with a smell, sharp, bitter, electrical, sliding through the penthouse vents like a warning that came too late. Alaric Sterling paused mid-conversation, crystal glass hovering near his lips, eyes narrowing just a fraction. He was used to controlling rooms. Rooms didn't unsettle him. Markets did. Boardrooms did. But smoke. Smoke didn't care who owned the building. A guest coughed near the balcony doors. Another laughed nervously, assuming it was a kitchen mishap. Music still drifted from the speaker's soft piano, curated for investors who pretended not to be impressed by 14-foot ceilings and skyline windows that framed Manhattan like a painting someone paid too much for. Zora felt it before anyone else. She always did. She shifted beside Alaric, fingers brushing his wrist. "Do you smell that?" He inhaled again. Plastic. Wiring. Something burning behind walls that were supposed to be fireproof because he'd paid obscene amounts for that exact promise. "I'll have security check," he said, already reaching for his phone. The alarms cut him off, shrill, unapologetic. Red lights pulsed along the ceiling like veins suddenly exposed. Sprinklers hesitated, then failed to trigger. Someone screamed. A woman dropped her clutch, heels skidding on marble as guests surged toward the exits. Champagne flutes shattering in bright explosions that echoed too loudly for a party that had been curated to feel effortless. Smoke leaked from a hallway vent, thin at first, then thick enough to sting eyes. Alaric straightened. "Everyone out. Now." His voice carried the command of someone who had spent his life being obeyed. Security rushed forward, radios crackling. But another sound broke through the chaos. "Ethan." Alaric's chest locked. His younger brother's name moved through him like a blade. He went back for his phone. Someone shouted. "No, he was in the East Wing." Another voice added, panicked. "The East Wing. Storage vaults. Private rooms. The part of the penthouse farthest from the exits." Zora's fingers tightened around Alaric's sleeve. He wouldn't. A dull boom cut through the air. Not loud enough to be an explosion, just structural. Just wrong. The lights flickered. Smoke surged. Alaric turned sharply. "Get out." "Now?" Zora didn't move. She stared down the hall where the smoke thickened into something almost solid, swallowing the polished floors he'd bragged about in architectural magazines. "Ethan's in there," she said. Security hesitated. "We're calling the fire department." Hay could be unconscious. Zora snapped, already pulling off her heels. Alaric grabbed her arm. "Don't." His grip was firm. Protective. Reflexive. The word landed harder than he meant it to. She looked at him. Really looked at him. "You want me to stand here?" He opened his mouth. Closed it. Another cough echoed from the hallway. Weaker. Zora didn't wait for permission. She twisted free and ran. Straight into the smoke. Alaric shouted her name. It vanished before it reached her. Heat rushed down the corridor like breath from a furnace. Paint bubbled along the walls. A ceiling panel dropped somewhere deeper inside, shattering with a crash that made guests scream louder behind him. Security lunged forward, but the smoke forced them back. Alaric stood frozen at the threshold, watching the woman he loved disappear into something he couldn't buy, couldn't negotiate with, couldn't intimidate. Minutes stretched. No, seconds pretending to be minutes. Sprinklers finally sputtered to life in one corner, dribbling uselessly against a blaze they hadn't been designed for. Another boom rattled the floor beneath his shoes. Someone grabbed his shoulder, urging him toward the stairs. He shook them off. Then, movement. A shadow staggering through smoke. Alaric's heart jumped into his throat. Zora emerged coughing, hair half singed, soot streaking her bare arms. She wasn't alone. Ethan hung between her shoulders limp, one arm dangling unnaturally as she dragged him across the floor. In her other hand, Alaric blinked, disbelief slicing through terror. 3 metal cases, blackened, warped by heat, his grandfather's watches. The heirlooms he'd locked away in the vault, because they were worth more than most apartments. "What are you doing?" Her knees buckled. Security rushed forward, lifting Ethan, taking the cases. Zora collapsed onto the marble. Smoke poured behind her, swallowing the hallway completely as flames finally licked into view. Alaric dropped beside her, gripping her shoulders. "You're insane," he whispered, voice shaking in a way he hated. She tried to laugh. It came out as a cough that racked her whole body. "Don't call me that." Blood streaked along her temple. The skin at her neck was red, too red, blistering already. "Ethan," she croaked. He's breathing." Alaric said quickly, even though he hadn't checked himself. "You got him. You got him out." Her lips curved faintly. "Good." Paramedics burst through the stairwell doors with oxygen tanks and stretchers. They moved fast. Professional. Efficient. Cold in the way emergencies always were. One of them knelt beside Zora, snapping on gloves. "Mom, can you hear me?" Zora blinked slowly. Alaric hovered too close, ignoring the medic's glare. "She ran into the fire," he said. "She dragged my brother out?" The word sounded unreal even to him. The medic glanced at Zora's neck, her cheek. His jaw tightened. "We need to get her downstairs." "Now?" Another medic fitted an oxygen mask over her face. Zora's eyes found Alaric through the clear plastic. She reached for him. Weak, soot-stained fingers trembling. He caught her hand without thinking. Her grip was light. Too light. "You're not allowed," she murmured. "Allowed to what?" "To remodel the penthouse without me." A breathless half-smile. He swallowed hard. "I won't." Flashes exploded near the windows. Blue and red lights strobed across the glass. Fire engines. Police. News vans already lining the street below, hungry for billionaire disaster. Alaric felt something twist in his chest that had nothing to do with fear for Zora. Cameras. Headlines. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Board members. PR teams. Investors who would want statements before the smoke even cleared. Zora was lifted onto a stretcher. She winced as straps tightened around her torso. Alaric walked beside them toward the elevator, refusing to let go of her hand until a paramedic gently pried his fingers away. "Sir, we've got her." The doors slid shut between them. The reflection in the polished metal showed his face streaked with ash. Not heroic, not composed, just shaken. He stood there long after the elevator descended, alarms screaming overhead, watching smoke stain the ceiling of a home he'd once called untouchable. Behind him someone whispered, "She saved his brother." Another voice added, "She went back for the vault." The words threaded together in a way that made his stomach tighten. He didn't correct them. Didn't say she'd done both. Didn't say she'd chosen people first. Firefighters rushed past, hoses unspooling. Water thundered against glass walls. Steam rolled upward. Alaric finally stepped toward the windows, staring down at the flashing lights below. At the reporters clustering like vultures around a story that wasn't finished yet. He pressed his palm to the glass. Somewhere inside the ambulance, Zora was being cut out of a ruined dress. Somewhere inside the smoke, his penthouse was burning. And somewhere deeper than either of those things, a question had started forming in his chest. One he didn't want to hear. One he wasn't ready to answer. As paramedics raced Zora into the night, a firefighter approached Alaric, voice low and urgent. "Sir, the east wing vault collapsed. If she'd stayed in there 30 seconds longer, she wouldn't have made it out." The hospital smelled like bleach and overheated machines. Alaric noticed that first. Not the beeping monitors. Not the muffled voices behind curtains. Not even the way Zora's breathing sounded shallow through the oxygen mask. Just the smell. Clean, sterile, controlled. It comforted him more than it should have. Zora woke slowly. Pain arrived before memory. A heavy ache crawled across her cheek, down her neck. Her throat burned every time she swallowed. When she tried to move, something tugged at her skin. Bandages. Thick ones. Wrapped too tight. She blinked against bright lights. Shapes came into focus. Ceiling tiles. A drip stand. A shadow seated beside her bed. Alaric. He was leaning forward, elbows on his knees, phone in his hand. Scrolling. Jaw clenched. Suit jacket folded neatly over the chair. Perfect hair. Untouched by smoke now. She breathed his name. Alaric. He looked up instantly. The relief on his face was real. Raw. For half a second, she saw the man she married. "You're awake," he said, standing too fast. "Thank God." Her lips felt cracked. "Ethan is stable," Alaric answered quickly. "Surgery went well." She exhaled. Her eyes fluttered shut for a second. When she opened them again, she tried to smile. "Good." He watched her face too carefully. Not in the way lovers do. In the way investors studied markets. Assessing damage, she felt it. Even through the pain. "How bad is it?" she asked. Alaric hesitated. A micro pause, almost invisible. "They had to graft skin," he said gently. "Your neck. Part of your cheek." She lifted a shaky hand. Stopped when pain spiked. Didn't touch the bandages. Didn't need to. She saw it in his eyes. The way his gaze slid away. The way his jaw tightened. The way his breath hitched. With calculation. "What about the watches?" she asked suddenly. He blinked. "What?" "The cases?" she whispered. "Did they make it out?" He nodded. "Yes." A faint smile curved her mouth. "Good. They mattered to you." Something flickered across his face. Guilt. Then it was gone. Doctors entered. Burn specialists. Nurses adjusting machines. They spoke in careful tones. Percentages. Healing timelines. Plastic surgery options. Alaric listened closely. Too closely. He asked about visibility. About long-term scarring. About what cameras might pick up. Zora caught every word. Even when her head throbbed. Even when morphine blurred the edges. After they left, silence returned. He sat back down, cleared his throat. "I spoke to the PR team." Her eyes drifted to him slowly. "About the fire?" "Yes, we're framing it as an electrical issue. No fault assigned yet." She nodded. "That's fine." He hesitated again. That pause was becoming familiar. "I didn't tell them it was you." Her brow creased. "Why not?" He forced a smile. "I wanted to protect you, not the truth." She knew him too well. From what? From the spotlight. He stood, walked to the window, looked down at the street 15 floors below. Reporters still waited. She could see the glow of cameras through the glass. I don't want them taking pictures of you like this, he added. Like this? The words landed heavier than the painkillers. She swallowed. I saved your brother? I know. I saved the watches? I know. He turned back to her. His face was gentle. His eyes were tired. But something inside them had shifted. Zora felt it. A crack. You're not staying tonight, she said. It wasn't a question. He exhaled. Board meeting in the morning. Of course. Silence stretched. She watched him struggle. Not with fear. With decision. Finally, he reached into his jacket. Pulled out a thick envelope. Placed it carefully on her tray table. Like it might explode. What's that? She asked. A settlement. Her stomach tightened. For what? Just security. She opened it slowly. Papers. Legal language. Signatures already printed. Her name typed in clean black font. Desel Ution of Mara IG. Her fingers froze. She looked up. He couldn't meet her eyes. What is this? He spoke softly. Too softly. You deserve a fresh start. Her voice shook despite her effort. You're divorcing me. I'm offering you peace. Peace. She repeated. He stepped closer. You've been through trauma. This will help you disappear for a while. Heal privately. Disappear. And then what? She asked. His jaw tightened. We move on. Her chest hurt worse than her burns. You mean you move on? He didn't deny it. I can make sure you're taken care of? He added quickly. Housing. Medical care. Whatever you need. She stared at him. Searching for something. Remorse. Fire. Anything. Instead she found fear. Not of losing her, of keeping her. Say it. She whispered. He frowned. Say what? Say you can't be married to someone who looks like this. His silence was answer enough. You don't know what I look like, she said. I know what the cameras will show. The words sliced clean. She let out a shaky breath. I ran into fire for you. I didn't ask you to. That hurt most. She closed the folder. Slowly, carefully, like it might cut her. I need time. He nodded too fast. Of course. But his relief betrayed him. A nurse knocked. Said visiting hours were ending. Alaric leaned down. Kissed her forehead. Avoided her cheek. I'll check on you tomorrow. He didn't wait for her to respond. The door shut behind him. Zora stared at the envelope. Her reflection stared back from the metal IV pole. Bandages. Swelling. Strangers. She picked up a pen. Not yet. But soon. Outside, sirens wailed. Inside, something inside her broke open. Not loudly. Quietly. Cleanly. And it scared her more than the fire ever had. Zora did not sign the papers that night. She lay awake long after the corridor lights dimmed and the nurse's footsteps faded into distant echoes. Staring at the ceiling while pain moved through her body in slow, deliberate waves. Every breath dragged against raw skin. Every shift of her shoulders sent a sharp reminder of what fire had taken and left behind. But it wasn't the burns that kept her awake. It was the memory of Alaric's eyes when he placed that envelope on her tray. Careful, distant. Already halfway gone. Morning crept into the room on a thin band of gray light. Zora watched it crawl across the floor and climb the wall, touching the edge of the metal bed frame before slipping over her blanket. She imagined him waking in some immaculate guest suite, scrolling through messages from board members while she lay wrapped in gauze and antiseptic. The thought didn't make her angry yet. It made her hollow. When the surgeon came, he spoke gently, like people did when they were afraid of breaking you. He explained grafts, recovery timelines, and the possibility of reconstructive procedures down the line. He avoided words like permanent. Zora didn't. She saw the hesitation in his face when he described how much tissue had been damaged. She nodded, asked practical questions, and didn't mention that her husband hadn't returned. Days passed. Alaric sent flowers once. White lilies. Too fragrant. They made her nauseous. A card accompanied them, signed with his neat handwriting. Rest. I'll handle everything. She didn't know what everything meant anymore. When he finally came back, he didn't sit. He stood near the foot of her bed, phone silenced but face alert, like he was bracing for an interruption. He spoke about insurance, about moving her to a private recovery facility, about discretion. He never mentioned staying. Zora listened. Then she said quietly, "You've already told the lawyers." He froze for half a second. That was answer enough. After he left, she asked for a mirror. The nurse hesitated. Zora insisted. The reflection stole the air from her lungs. One side of her face was still swollen, angry red creeping beneath translucent dressings. The curve of her jaw was unfamiliar. The smooth line of her neck was gone, replaced with ridges hidden under layers of medical tape. She lowered the mirror slowly, hands shaking, then steadied herself with a long breath. She didn't cry. Not then. She cried 3 days later alone. When she dropped a spoon because her hand wouldn't stop trembling, and no one rushed to pick it up except a stranger. That was when she signed. Not because she believed his words. Because she finally understood them. The money cleared within 48 hours. She transferred most of it the same day. Quietly. Through an attorney who never asked questions. She sent the funds to a surgical wing at the hospital under a trust name that did not include hers or Alaric's. Ethan's rehab program was fully paid for. Experimental therapy. The best physical specialists in the state. When the lawyer called to confirm, he sounded confused. "You're aware this is a large portion of the settlement, Ms. Vance?" "Yes," Zora said. "And you want to remain anonymous?" "Wes." She didn't explain why. She didn't need to. Disappearing was harder than she expected. She left before the press found her room. Before tabloids printed grainy photos. Before Alaric's team could arrange a joint statement. She signed herself out early, ignored a nurse's warning, and walked out of the hospital in a scarf that brushed painfully against her neck and oversized sunglasses that hid more than her eyes. The air outside felt different. Sharper. Like the world had moved forward while she'd been trapped in white walls. She took a cab. Didn't give the driver an address at first. Just sat there until he glanced back in the mirror, confused. "Anywhere quiet," she finally said. He dropped her near a cheap motel on the edge of downtown. It smelled like cleaning spray and old carpet. She didn't care. She locked the door, collapsed onto the bed, and slept for 14 hours. Weeks blurred after that. Doctors. Follow-up appointments. Scar creams that burned. Compression garments that made breathing feel like work. Silence where a marriage had been. She stopped checking news about Alaric. Stopped answering numbers she didn't recognize. When she looked in mirrors now, she learned to tilt her head just right. Light could soften anything. Angles were power. She started practicing with makeup the way some people practiced meditation. Slow strokes. Color correction. Layers thin enough to feel like skin. It wasn't vanity. It was survival. In a drugstore aisle, she tested concealers until her eyes watered from standing too long. She studied undertones. Bought palettes she couldn't afford. Watched tutorial videos. At 2 a.m. with her laptop balanced on folded towels so she wouldn't strain her neck. Something in her woke up. Not hope. Control. Months passed. Her face healed into something new, not ruined. Different. A topography she learned by touch. Then nausea came. Morning first. Then all day, she ignored it. Blamed painkillers, stress, cheap coffee, until a clinic test turned positive in under a minute. Zora stared at the little window like it had betrayed her. She sat in her car for a long time afterward, hands on the steering wheel, engine off. Rain drumming against the windshield. She didn't call Alaric. She didn't even think about it. She pressed her forehead to the wheel and whispered, just that. Okay. Pregnancy made everything sharper. Smells, memories, fear, but also resolve. She worked freelance under a different name, doing makeup for small photo shoots, helping brides with shaky hands and models with tired faces. Word traveled quietly. Someone recommended her to someone else. She kept her scarves, her collars high, her life narrow. When labor came early, it came fast. Too fast. A neighbor drove her. She screamed. She cursed. She laughed hysterically between contractions, because pain did that. It cracked you open and made room for strange things. Mila arrived just after dawn, blue-eyed. Perfect, Zora cried then. Not pretty tears, ugly, shaking ones. The nurse blinked at the baby's eyes but didn't comment. Zora didn't explain. 4 years compressed into a blur of exhaustion and triumph. Cheap apartments. Better ones. Late nights practicing contour on herself, while Mila slept beside her in a laundry basket turned crib. Clients who tipped well. Clients who asked for her number again. A social media account she didn't attach her face to. Just before and after shots. Brushes. Skin transformations. She called herself the alchemist as a joke. It stuck. One magazine feature changed everything. No photo. Just reputation. Discreet. Expensive. The day she opened her first private studio, she locked the door after the last worker left and stood in the center of the empty room, breathing in paint and fresh wood. Mila toddled between chairs. You did it. Zora whispered to herself. She meant all of it. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She ignored it. Then it buzzed again, and again. Finally she answered. This is Zora. A woman's voice, smooth and clipped. Hello. I'm calling from Sterling & Co. We'd like to book your services for an engagement shoot. Zora's hand tightened around the phone. Dates? She asked. Voice perfectly calm. She didn't yet know whose name would appear on the contract. Only that something old had just reached back into her life. Zora opened the emailed inquiry and froze when she read the groom's name. Alaric felt the air leave his lungs. The little girl's eyes didn't blink. She studied him with quiet curiosity, not fear, not shyness. Piercing blue, his blue. Not a shadow of it. His chest tightened. Something deep inside him twisting. Chloe didn't notice. She was too busy waving her phone in the air, showing herself on Instagram. Lips slightly pursed in that perfect pout she thought commanded attention. This better be worth it, she repeated. If this woman ruins my engagement photos, I swear I'll. She stopped mid-sentence when Zora's hand rested lightly on the child's shoulder. Alaric couldn't move. Not a muscle. Not a thought. He tried to blink. It did nothing. The name on the door flashed in his mind like a warning. Zora Vance. The woman who had run into fire for him. The woman he had abandoned. The woman holding their daughter. He didn't breathe. She did. Softly. Calmly. Even with a small child balanced on her hip, she moved like she belonged there, like the chaos of his life had nothing to do with her. Her eyes flicked to him briefly, professional, distant. Nothing like the nights they had spent in penthouse bedrooms where whispers had meant everything. Alaric felt the blood drain from his face. Chloe's voice broke through shrill. Ms. Sterling, yes, it's me. Fix my under eyes and the jawline. and make me glow. But not shiny. Zora tilted her head, unreadable. Of course, she said, calm as a river. Alaric noticed the sleeves rolled neatly above her wrists. Strong forearms. Hands that had carried more weight than he ever had in boardrooms or investments. And now delicate enough to hold a 4-year-old. Mila clutched the stuffed fox tighter, looking at him as if she recognized a stranger in a familiar face. Alaric's stomach knotted. He tried to speak. Couldn't. He opened his mouth. Closed it again. Chloe tapped her nails impatiently. This is taking forever. Zora nodded once, then looked at the little girl. Sit here, sweetheart, she said gently. Mila toddled over to the vanity, fox clutched against her chest. Alaric's heart hammered in ways that felt like panic, shame, and all at once. Every memory of Zora flashed in fragments: the hospital, the fire, her pain, the way she had walked away from everything, because he couldn't be the man she needed. And now she stood here, commanding a room with nothing but presence, untouched by the chaos he had built around himself. Chloe frowned. Why is she so calm? Professionalism. Alaric whispered without thinking. He didn't look at Chloe. He looked at Zora. And at Mila. The resemblance was uncanny. The tilt of the nose, the sharp curve of the chin, the eyes. Zora caught him staring, and held his gaze. Cold, controlled, impervious. Not a hint of the woman he had left behind. Alaric's mouth opened again. Zora's lips curved faintly. She didn't smile. Not fully. But just enough. Enough to remind him of everything he had lost. She turned back to Chloe, giving Alaric one last glance before lifting her tools. Shall we begin? Chloe perched on the chair, fluttering her fingers, already critiquing her own reflection in the mirror. Alaric felt trapped in a nightmare. Every word Chloe said, every flick of her nails, grated against him. Every brush Zora picked up was precise, confident, unyielding. Alaric could hardly watch. Mila climbed onto a stool nearby. She looked up at him again. Curiosity, innocence, recognition. Alaric's throat went dry. He tried to speak again. Yoshi. Zora's hand moved with the brush. She didn't flinch. She didn't answer. Alaric felt panic clawing up his spine. Every second stretched into eternity. The child reached for a palette. Alaric's eyes followed the motion. Unmistakably hers. He wanted to call out, to reach for Mila, to say something, anything. But he stayed frozen. Chloe leaned forward. Are you going to fix this, or what? Zora glanced at her, professional, voice calm as icy. Well, start with the eyes. The room smelled faintly of lavender and citrus. The kind of scent that commanded attention without screaming. Alaric felt it invade his senses. Memory pressed against him. The hospital halls, the smoke, the screaming, and now here she was, holding their daughter, alive, strong, beautiful, untouchable. He swallowed hard. His own words stuck in his throat. Chloe tapped her foot impatiently again. Zora didn't react. Not to Chloe. Not to him. Not even to the little girl humming softly while adjusting the stuffed fox. Every stroke of the brush, every movement, was deliberate. Calculated. Perfect. Alaric's chest tightened. The past collided with the present. He felt guilt, fear, longing, regret, all at once. He realized he had spent 3 years thinking he could buy control. He had been wrong. Now, control wasn't money. Control wasn't influence. Control wasn't status. It was her, and she didn't want it. Zora paused, holding a brush mid-air. Her gaze flicked toward him again. Not soft. Not angry. Just questioning. Mila tugged at Zora's blouse. Mommy, she whispered. Alaric froze. Zora's eyes softened for a split second, then hardened again. She murmured. She straightened, brush moving across Chloe's skin with surgical precision. Chloe murmured complaints about shadows and colors. Alaric didn't hear them. All he could see was the child. The child with his eyes. Zora's arms steady, her hands strong. Her entire presence a wall he could never climb. Alaric's heart pounded. He realized something terrifying. He didn't just recognize Zora. He recognized himself in her, and in Mila. A life he had walked away from, and now he had nowhere to step. Zora set down the brush. Mila clutched the fox and looked at him. Alaric's knees almost gave way. His pulse echoed in his ears. He had to say something. But nothing came. She didn't offer words. Just that look. The kind of look that makes a man realize the cost of every selfish decision. And the cost was higher than he ever imagined. Chloe gasped suddenly. Wait, why does she look like? Alaric's stomach turned. Zora's gaze never left his. She leaned slightly, tilting her head as though daring him to speak. Alaric wanted to run. He wanted to speak. He wanted to collapse. All at once. But he did none of it. He couldn't. Because in front of him, the woman he had once discarded was no longer the woman he thought he knew. And in her arms, the child was the proof of everything he had lost. The brush moved again in Zora's hand. Precision. Calm. Power. Alaric couldn't look away. Not for a second. Not even when Chloe demanded attention again. He was paralyzed. And that realization hit him harder than any boardroom loss, any financial setback, any insult he had ever endured. He had been absent. He had walked away. And now he had no script, no leverage, no control, only the reflection of what he had destroyed. And the child. Mila. Their child. Zora's brush hovered over Chloe's face. Her eyes flicked to Alaric, and she said softly, almost inaudible but piercing through his frozen disbelief, "Do you recognize her?" Alaric's throat went dry. The room tilted, and he could not answer. Alaric felt the word echo in his chest. Daddy. The sound hung in the air like smoke. He could barely breathe. Mila tugged again at Zora's sleeve, small fingers firm against the silk. Fox. Zora repeated gently, guiding her daughter's attention to the stuffed animal. Mila hesitated, then nodded, hugging it tighter. Alaric wanted to step forward. He wanted to reach out. He wanted to touch her face, smooth her hair, whisper that he was her father. But he didn't. Zora's eyes met his in the mirror.
Not accusing, not begging.
Just calm, measured. Powerful. He knew she could see his thoughts. Every one of them. Alaric's palms grew sweaty. Chloe glanced up at him oblivious. This brush too thick, she complained. Start again. Zora didn't flinch. Her hands moved with precision. Alaric's gaze drifted back to the child. 4 years old. 4. He had missed 4 birthdays. 4 first steps. 4 nights of lullabies he would never hear. Mila's eyes flicked to him again. The same icy blue piercing. Recognition. Curiosity. Suspicion. All at once. Alaric's throat tightened. Zora leaned down, tucking a stray curl behind Mila's ear. You're staying close, few nicks, she murmured again. Alaric's chest tightened, even further. He hadn't realized how small her hands were. How delicate. How strong in the ways that mattered. Chloe twisted in the chair, frustrated. Why is this taking so long? Zora didn't answer. Her calmness infuriated Chloe. Alaric's mind raced. Every memory of Zora collided with the present. The hospital. The fire. The silence that had stretched between them for years. And now, Mila. Alive. Unbroken. Proof of everything he had abandoned. He wanted to speak. He wanted to say something. But the words caught in his throat. Zora's brush moved across Chloe's skin, precise and deliberate. She didn't flinch. She didn't react to Alaric's frozen gaze. The air seemed to thicken around him. Every stroke of the brush reminded him of what he had lost. Mila shifted on the stool, clutching the fox, her tiny hands trembling slightly. Zora's voice softened. "Steady, Phoenix. Look at your fox." Mila obeyed, her eyes flickering to the toy, then back to her mother. Alaric's heart pounded against his ribs. He realized the truth he had buried deep. He hadn't abandoned Zora because of fire, scars, or fear. He had abandoned himself, his courage, his capacity to love fully. And now, here she was, a mother, strong, beautiful, untouchable. Alaric's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Chloe leaned closer, voice sharp. "Seriously, this is taking forever. Are you done yet?" Zora didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than any words could. Mila yawned, tired from the long day. Zora lifted her gently, rocking her slightly. Alaric felt the weight of what he had missed. Every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every laugh he had never heard. Chloe huffed, clearly annoyed. "Ugh. Fine, do whatever. But hurry up." Zora's hands moved with unmatched skill, every motion precise, like painting life itself. Alaric's chest tightened. He noticed the scar on her neck. The faint line that caught the light just so. Not a flaw, a mark of survival, a medal he had refused to see. He remembered the fire, the smoke, the screams, the helplessness, and now he stared at her again, in control, holding their daughter, his daughter, 4 years old, perfect. He wanted to kneel, he wanted to beg, he wanted to reclaim the life he had lost. But he didn't, he couldn't. Chloe's voice snapped him out of his reverie. "Finally! Can we finish?" Zora's brush paused mid-air. Her gaze cut to him in the mirror again. Not soft, not challenging. "Do you see her?" she asked, voice low. Alaric swallowed. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, I see her." Zora nodded slightly, as if that acknowledgement changed nothing. Mila tugged at Zora's sleeve again. "Mummy." Zora bent slightly, whispered something soft. Alaric couldn't catch it. The words didn't need translation. He understood the meaning. The shield she had built around herself. The life she had rebuilt. The fortress he had no key to. Chloe huffed again, flustered. "This is ridiculous. We're wasting time." Alaric finally moved. One careful step forward. Zora didn't flinch. She held Mila closer. The little girl's eyes lifted to him again. Piercing blue, silent, questioning. Alaric's heart ached. He wanted to speak. He wanted to explain. He wanted to claim the child as his own. But Zora didn't give him the chance. Instead, she set Mila back on the stool. "Phoenix," she said softly. The child's tiny hands gripped the fox again. Zora's gaze met Alaric's. "You understand this is not a game," she said. He nodded, voice caught in his throat. "I understand," he whispered. Her eyes didn't soften. They never did. She turned back to Chloe, voice smooth, unwavering. "Shall we continue?" Chloe nodded, oblivious to the tension thickening the room. Alaric's mind raced. Every second felt like a lifetime. He had walked into a studio thinking he could control everything. Now, he realized he controlled nothing. The child, the woman, his own fate. Zora's brush moved with grace, painting over Chloe's skin flawlessly. Alaric couldn't look away. Every motion was a reminder of what he had lost. The past, the fire, the hospital, the years. All collapsed into a single moment. Mila yawned again, exhausted. Zora tucked a loose curl behind her ear. Her fingers lingered briefly, tenderly, only for the child. Alaric swallowed hard. He could feel the weight of everything pressing down. He wanted to speak. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to beg. But he couldn't. Chloe finally adjusted her pose in the chair, satisfied. Zora didn't acknowledge her. Not once. Not even a flicker of attention. Alaric's chest felt tight. He realized the gulf between them was wider than he could cross. Even with words, even with apologies, even with money. Zora had rebuilt herself. Stronger, unbreakable, untouchable, and he was a ghost standing in her studio, watching, unable to claim anything. His own daughter, the life he had abandoned, the fire that had taken everything but left her standing. Zora finally set the brush down. Mila leaned against her, tired, clutching the fox. Chloe fluffed her hair, pleased with the result. Zora's eyes found Alaric's again, and she said, quietly but firmly, "You were gone, and now you're here." Alaric opened his mouth. No words came. The truth pressed like a stone in his chest. He realized then he had no control. No plan, no escape, only the child, only Zora, and a past he could never rewrite. Mila reached out toward him, tiny hand trembling. Zora's gaze hardened. Alaric's mind froze. And for the first time, he realized what happens next is not up to him. Zora's eyes locked onto his, unflinching, unyielding. The scars gleamed under the harsh studio lights, jagged silver lines that traced a story of fire, pain, and survival. Alaric felt as if the air itself had thickened around him, pressing against his chest with every heartbeat. For a moment, he was paralyzed, unable to look away, unable to speak, unable to breathe. The world narrowed to the reflection in the mirror, to the woman he had abandoned, to the child sitting quietly nearby, clutching her fox with small, trembling hands. Chloe's gasp sounded distant to him, sharp and irritating but hollow. She recoiled, twisting her chair as though the sight itself were a personal affront. "Oh my God, what happened to your face?" she shrieked, voice dripping with disgust. Zora did not rush to wipe the solvent from her skin. She stood still, as though daring the world, daring him, to flinch first. The brush she had been holding hovered in the air, unused, a weapon and a shield both. Her jaw was set, every line in her face purposeful, and Alaric felt something he hadn't felt in years, a deep, suffocating shame that burned hotter than any boardroom failure, any public scandal, any financial loss he had ever endured. He remembered the fire vividly now, smoke curling around the edges of his vision, heat pressing against his skin, the screams, the chaos, and then Zora running into it. Running for him, for his family, for Ethan. She had carried him, had carried his brother, had carried the weight of his mistakes, and she had done it all without a second thought for herself. Chloe wrinkled her nose and turned to him as though seeking validation, her voice laced with superficial horror. "That's revolting," she said again. Alaric shook his head slightly, a whisper escaping from his lips before he could stop it. "Zora." She did not blink, did not flinch, did not speak. Her gaze anchored him, steady and powerful, cutting through the years of absence, the years of lies, the years of his cowardice. Mila clutched her stuffed fox closer, sensing tension, eyes wide as they darted between the two adults. There was innocence there, a quiet curiosity, a recognition that made Alaric's heart twist further. That small voice that had once called him Daddy echoed in his mind, and he felt an ache he could not name. Zora finally lowered her gaze slightly, just enough for him to see the subtle, controlled breathing she maintained, the way she held herself as if she were untouchable, untamed, and entirely in control. Every scar was a medal, every line a story he had no right to claim, yet could not tear his eyes away from. Chloe's impatience grew. "Are you seriously just going to stand there? Can we finish this?" she demanded, twirling a strand of her hair. Zora's brush returned to Chloe's skin. Precise, deliberate, almost surgical. Alaric could not look away. Every flick of the brush reminded him of the life he had lost, of the family he had walked away from, of the love he had abandoned when it mattered most. His chest tightened until it felt like the walls of the studio were closing in on him. He wanted to step forward. He wanted to speak. He wanted to reach for her hand, to apologize, to claim even a shred of what he had left behind. But he could not. Zora's calm, unwavering composure forbade it. The child shifted on the stool. Fox held tight and glanced at him again. Those blue eyes, so much like his own, pierced him with silent accusation and curiosity all at once. He wanted to cry out, to explain, to undo years of absence, but his tongue felt heavy, useless. Chloe wrinkled her nose, clearly noticing the tension but too self-absorbed to understand it. "You're completely overreacting," she said, tossing her hair back. "It's just makeup. Well, maybe not hers, but still, can we move on?" Alaric's gaze never left Zora. Every scar, every tremor of light across her face, spoke of sacrifices he had refused to acknowledge. The memory of the hospital, the smoke, the flames, all of it pressed against him, and he realized with a sharp, almost unbearable clarity that he had not lost her because of circumstances. He had lost her because he was too small, too weak, too self-absorbed to stand in the shadow of a hero. Zora set down her brush, finally, but she did not turn. Her eyes remained locked on his reflection. Mila's small hand reached out, brushing against the fox instinctively, as if sensing the tension he could not break. Alaric's chest heaved. He wanted to speak, to plead, to justify, but nothing came out. Not a word, not a sound. Only guilt and longing and fear collided within him. Chloe huffed in frustration, clearly bored with the drama she could not perceive fully. "Seriously. Can we move on? This is ridiculous." Zora's voice cut through, calm and deliberate, commanding and unwavering. "This is not ridiculous. And you will not touch what is not yours." Alaric felt the weight of the words settle over him like a stone. He realized, with a sickening clarity, that he had walked into her studio thinking he could control the moment, thinking he could reclaim a life that had slipped through his fingers. But control was an illusion. He had nothing here. Nothing. Only the child, their daughter, watching him quietly, clutching her fox. Only the woman he had once loved, who had survived, who had rebuilt, who had become untouchable. Zora's gaze softened just slightly, only toward Mila, not toward him. Not yet. Alaric swallowed. His throat burned. He wanted to kneel. He wanted to beg. He wanted to reclaim even a fragment of what he had lost. But he knew he could not. Not yet. She had all the power. She held it lightly, deliberately. In every line of her posture, in every blink of her eyes, in every measured movement. Chloe continued to babble about shadows and highlights, but Alaric heard nothing. He was frozen in place, paralyzed by the magnitude of what he was witnessing. The brush moved again in Zora's hands, precise and deliberate, painting a flawless surface over Chloe's skin. But Alaric could no longer see the superficial beauty being created. He only saw the scars, the survival, the strength, the life he had abandoned. Mila yawned, exhausted. Zora lifted her gently and tucked a loose curl behind her ear, the movement tender, deliberate, and wholly unselfish. Alaric's chest tightened further. Finally, Zora set Mila back down and straightened, turning slightly to face him fully. She spoke, low, deliberate. Almost a whisper, but carrying across the room with undeniable weight. "You think these scars are flaws to fix. You think this life is yours to reclaim. You are wrong. You never had it. And now. She paused. Her eyes held his entirely, cold and unwavering. Now, you are just a witness. Alaric felt a tremor pass through him. His heart raced. His legs felt like lead. His mind scrambled, searching for words, for some way to undo what he had lost. But there was nothing. Zora lifted her head slightly, brushing a strand of hair back, her eyes still locked on him, unwavering, unflinching. The reality hit him like a freight train. He had been gone for years. She had survived. She had rebuilt. And now she was untouchable. And in her arms, their daughter watched him with wide blue eyes that mirrored his own. He was powerless, utterly powerless. Mila's small voice broke the silence. "Daddy, are you going to play with me?" Alaric froze, the weight of the room pressing down on him, and Zora's gaze sharpened, almost lethal in its calm intensity. And for the first time, he realized, he was not in control of anything here. Not the child, not her, not even his own redemption. Alaric froze as the torn check fell in two halves onto the marble floor. His hands hovered, useless, as if the motion itself would undo the humiliation he suddenly felt pressing down on him. He had spent years believing money could solve everything. His mistakes, his guilt, his failures, and now, in this studio, in front of the woman he had abandoned, it was worthless. Zora didn't flinch. Not a muscle. Not a blink. She held herself tall, the picture of composure, of power earned through fire, sweat, and quiet endurance. Mila tugged at her sleeve, looking up at him with the seriousness only a child could wield. That blue-eyed stare cut straight to his chest, laying bare every cowardice, every selfish act, every moment he had failed to be the man she needed. Alaric wanted to speak, to beg, to explain, but words dissolved in his throat. He realized for the first time in years that nothing he said mattered. Unless he proved it through actions, through presence, through honesty. Chloe scoffed again, waving her purse like a banner of entitlement. "I can't believe this. This is insane! $5,000 to cancel. Are you kidding me?" Zora didn't glance at her. Instead, she walked over to her desk, tablet in hand, and adjusted the screen slightly. Her scarred cheek caught the light, silver lines shimmering like badges of war. Every movement was precise, deliberate, calm. She radiated authority, power, and history, none of it for show, all of it earned. Alaric's chest ached, his hands clenched. He had assumed he could return, buy forgiveness, and perhaps reclaim a semblance of the life he had left behind. But he was wrong. Money didn't matter here. Control didn't matter here. Presence mattered. Time mattered. Truth mattered. And he had squandered all of it. Mila shifted in place, the small fox tucked under one arm. Her eyes met his again, unyielding. "My mommy says she's a phoenix," she said, voice firm. "What are you, Mr. Sad Man?" The words struck him like a hammer. He wanted to look away, to hide behind his wealth, his status, his carefully constructed life. But he couldn't. She had called him out with the innocence of a child, and yet the precision of someone who knew the world far better than her years should allow. Alaric felt Chloe's impatience brushing against him, irrelevant, alien. Her anger, her entitlement, her constant chatter, the petty concerns of a life lived in privilege, suddenly felt hollow. Empty. Meaningless. Zora folded her arms across her chest, the picture of quiet control. Her gaze never left his reflection in the mirror. "You're looking at your past, Alaric. Not your present. Not your future. Your present is her, and your future. That is not something you get to dictate anymore." Alaric swallowed hard. He could feel a wave of nausea rise in his stomach. He had walked into this studio expecting to feel in control, to impress, to claim. But the moment he saw her, the scars, and their daughter standing there, he realized the truth he had avoided for years. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even a man. He was a shadow of the person she had become. Chloe muttered something under her breath, offended, but Zora didn't react. Her calmness infuriated Chloe, but it grounded Alaric. Every line of Zora's face, every movement of her hands, every measured breath she took reminded him that she had survived what he couldn't even imagine. And in surviving, she had created a life, her life, that he had no part in. Alaric's heart pounded, heavy in his chest. He wanted to reach for Mila, to speak, to apologize, to claim something, anything, but Zora's gaze pinned him. He couldn't move. Her control over the room, over the narrative, over him, was absolute. The sound of Chloe's heels on the marble floor echoed, harsh and grating. "We're leaving," she said again, trying to assert authority that wasn't hers. "No," Zora replied simply, without raising her voice, without a tremor. The word carried weight. It was final, uncompromising. Alaric realized then that the woman in front of him was untouchable not because of scars or beauty, but because of willpower, intelligence, and the refusal to allow anyone, him included, to dictate her value. He opened his mouth, swallowed, tried again. "Zora, She cut him off with a look so sharp it almost hurt. "Do not. Not yet." Mila shuffled closer to her mother, Fox held tight, and whispered something that Alaric couldn't hear, something private between them, a secret he had no access to. His stomach twisted. He had lost the right to know it. The silence that followed was heavy, dense, oppressive, almost suffocating. Alaric realized he was seeing everything too late. The years of absence, the silence, the choices that had driven them apart. They all collided now in the confines of the studio. Chloe huffed, clearly bored, clearly not understanding the gravity of the moment. "I'm done," she said, voice rising. "This is ridiculous. I want to leave." Zora's hands hovered over the tablet again. "You may leave," she said, voice calm, precise, "but not without paying for the time you have already taken. $5,000. Non-negotiable." Alaric's fingers twitched toward the pen again, the old reflex of control, of trying to fix everything with money. But he stopped. He realized Zora had already anticipated him. She didn't need the check. She didn't need him. And for the first time, he understood. Money could not redeem him. Chloe's face paled slightly as she realized the seriousness in Zora's calm demeanor. She had been used to people caving under pressure, but this was different. Zora was unmovable. Alaric's gaze flicked to Mila. The little girl watched him, eyes unwavering, blue and piercing. She had already judged him, and he had failed. The room was silent except for the distant hum of the air conditioning and the soft ticking of a clock. Time felt slower, heavier, as if it were stretching to punish him. Alaric tried again. "I can fix this. I can help." Zora shook her head gently. "You cannot. You can only witness." He swallowed hard, chest tight, heart hammering. He had expected forgiveness, or at least acknowledgement. But there was none. She had rebuilt herself without him. She had created a life without him. He had no part in it now. Mila tugged at Zora's sleeve again, soft but firm. She looked at Alaric and tilted her head, silent challenge still in her gaze. Chloe stomped toward the door. "I can't." Zora tapped the tablet again. The sound was sharp, deliberate. "Payment first, or you stay." Chloe froze. Alaric exhaled shakily, realizing the truth in front of him. Nothing in his wealth, his power, his charm, or his history could touch what Zora had built. He was an outsider, a witness, and perhaps, in time, nothing more. Zora straightened fully, holding Mila's small hand lightly in hers. You came back expecting a storybook ending. But life doesn't work that way, Alaric. And I am not a character you get to write. Alaric's knees threatened to buckle. The weight of the room pressed against him. Everything he had assumed about control, about power, about love, it was gone. He was standing in the ruins of his past, watching a woman he had wronged, and a child he had abandoned, untouched by his wealth or regret. The room seemed to shrink around him. The mirror reflected not just his face, but his shame, his failures, his absence. And the little girl, Mila, stepped forward slightly, fox clutched to her chest, gaze unwavering. Alaric felt every instinct scream to move, to speak, to do something, anything. But Zora's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, firm, guiding her back. And in that small gesture, she made it clear. This was their world now, and he was not invited. Mila tilted her head and whispered softly, almost conspiratorially, "Are you really going to just watch, Daddy?" Alaric froze. The studio went silent. And he realized what comes next will change everything, and he has no power to stop it. Alaric's mind spun as the door clicked shut behind Ethan and Zora. His chest tightened, a cold wave of realization washing over him. He had walked in expecting control, expecting to impress, expecting to reclaim some piece of the past. Instead, he stood in an unfamiliar studio, stripped of leverage, stripped of illusions, facing a life that had moved on without him. Ethan's presence lingered even as he disappeared down the hallway. Tall, confident, radiating a calm power Alaric could not match. He was the living proof that Zora had rebuilt a world he had no part of. A silent investor, a business partner, someone who had shared the burden he had abandoned, someone who had seen her scars, her pain, her strength, and chosen to stand beside her. Alaric's fists clenched at his sides. Every instinct screamed to step forward, to speak, to claim authority, to reinsert himself into a world that no longer belonged to him. But he stopped. He could do nothing. Ethan was untouchable. Zora was untouchable. And their daughter Mila, even in her small frame, seemed untouchable as well. He thought back to the fire, the chaos, the smoke, the screams, and realized the true weight of what he had left behind. Zora had carried his brother to safety. She had saved lives while he had hesitated, paralyzed by fear and pride. She had rebuilt not just her life, but an empire from the ashes, one that included a man far stronger than him as a partner. Chloe fumed beside him, oblivious to the gravity of what had just been revealed. What is he doing here? Why would she need him? And you just stand there, she snapped, clearly frustrated that this world did not revolve around her. Alaric didn't respond. Words felt useless now. Money, charm, influence, they were all meaningless. He had nothing to offer. He realized it fully for the first time in his life. He had been a man of power, of wealth, of public admiration, yet none of that mattered here. None of it. Zora's voice cut through the tension, low and deliberate. You came in expecting to control a room, Alaric. You expected to manipulate the past. But control isn't given, it's earned. And you have earned nothing. Alaric's throat constricted. He wanted to argue. He wanted to remind her of the past, of his role, of all he had done for her once. But when he opened his mouth, the words died in the space between them. He couldn't argue against survival, against courage, against the years of silent strength she had built. Mila's small fingers curled around Zora's hand. She looked up at him. Wide blue eyes that held curiosity, judgment, and quiet amusement. He felt the weight of those eyes pierce him, cutting through every layer of pride, every defense he had built over years of distance. Zora folded her arms, her posture perfect, her presence commanding. Your brother's recovery? The studio, the investments, they were mine to handle. You chose absence, you chose pride. And now you stand here with nothing. Alaric's pulse raced. He could feel shame and awe collide inside him. Every heartbeat screamed that he had underestimated her, underestimated their strength, underestimated the resilience of a woman he had once thought weak. Chloe shifted uncomfortably, fidgeting with her purse, clearly annoyed that she was no longer the center of attention. This is ridiculous. Why are you even letting him stay here? We should leave, she snapped, her voice trembling between anger and fear. Zora's eyes flicked toward her briefly, sharp and unwavering. You leave, she said simply. He stays. For now. Alaric's stomach twisted. He had imagined confrontation, arguments, a chance to assert himself. Now, he was powerless, a bystander in a story he had once tried to write himself. He realized that the world he had left behind no longer existed. He had no leverage, no power, no claim. He was simply a witness. The hum of the studio lights filled the silence, a soft white noise that made every heartbeat sound louder. Alaric's eyes swept over the room. Every piece of furniture, every subtle detail reflected Zora's careful rebuilding. Nothing was chaotic. Nothing was misplaced. Everything had a purpose. Ethan had been more than a silent partner. He was a guardian of her new life. Someone who had taken the chaos she had survived and transformed it into structure, stability, and power. He had done what Alaric could not. He had seen her strength and matched it. Alaric wanted to argue, to remind her of the past, of everything he had once been. But he knew the truth now. She had moved on. The phoenix she had become could not be tamed, could not be bought, could not be claimed. He had no power here, and every instinct in his body screamed that this was not a moment to force a return. Chloe's sigh broke through again. Well, this is a nightmare. I didn't sign up for this drama. We're leaving, she said, grabbing her purse with forced confidence. Zora didn't react. She simply tapped the tablet on her desk again. Alaric realized the fee had already been accounted for, the structure of the transaction complete. Every detail of her life was planned, measured. She ran a world he had never been a part of, and would never control. Mila shifted closer to her mother. Fox hugged tightly. Her blue eyes locked on Alaric again. There was no accusation now, only curiosity, only expectation. She wanted to know what he would do, if he would rise to meet the challenge he had created by his absence. Alaric's hands shook slightly, his mind racing. He had imagined dominance, imagined control, imagined solutions. Now, he had nothing but observation, nothing but a growing, gnawing realization that the life he had abandoned was flourishing without him. Zora's voice sliced through his thoughts. Good luck with the engagement, Alaric, she said quietly, opening the door to let Chloe exit. Alaric took a hesitant step forward, almost as if to protest, almost as if to grasp the past and bend it back to him. But the moment he did, Mila's small hand gripped her mother's. The gesture was tiny but devastating. He could not reach her. He could not claim her. He could not fix anything. Ethan's eyes from the doorway lingered, steady, challenging, silent judgment, protective loyalty. A wall Alaric had no hope of breaching. The door clicked behind Chloe, And in the sudden quiet, Alaric felt every ounce of isolation, every ounce of failure, pressing down like weight he could not escape. He realized, painfully, fully, finally, that he was a man without leverage, without claim, without influence. A man standing in the presence of a woman and a child whose lives had flourished in his absence. The studio, once a place of potential control, now felt like a cage. He was trapped in his own past, forced to witness the results of choices he had abandoned. Mila tilted her head slightly, Fox pressed to her cheek. Her small voice cut through the air, calm but piercing. "Are you going to stay, Daddy? Or just watch?" Alaric froze. The words, innocent yet full of power, lodged deep in his chest. He understood in that instant. He was no longer a participant in this life. He was a spectator. And the game had already changed. The weight of that realization pressed down so heavily that he could barely breathe. His hands shook. His pride, his past, his wealth, none of it mattered here. Zora's eyes met his in the mirror again, sharp, unyielding, and yet, faintly, a challenge lingered behind the steel. If he wanted in, he would have to prove it. Not with money, not with charm, not with words, but with actions he had yet to take. Alaric's heart pounded. His mind raced. For the first time, he understood the truth of power, of presence, of redemption. Nothing is granted. Everything must be earned. He stepped forward. A single, tentative movement. His entire world had contracted to the studio, to Zora, to Mila, and the unspoken challenge between them. He realized that nothing in his life would ever feel this real again. And yet, he didn't stop. Mila's small voice rang out again. "If you want to play, Daddy, you have to catch me first." Alaric froze mid-step, staring at the girl whose life he had abandoned. And he realized the next move would define everything, and he had no idea if he could rise to it. Alaric's apartment felt hollow the night he returned. The city lights outside glimmered like coins scattered on black velvet, yet the wealth surrounding him felt meaningless. Each object, every expensive trinket, screamed of the life he had built, yet it lacked warmth, purpose, humanity. His mind replayed Zora's face, her scars revealed, her eyes unwavering. Mila's blue eyes haunted him, a mirror of his own, filled with questions he couldn't answer. The car ride, after leaving Chloe, had been suffocating. She had fumed, claiming injustice, her voice sharp and piercing, but Alaric barely heard it. His thoughts were occupied with smoke, heat, silver scars, and the child who had been the living proof of his mistakes. Every second with Chloe now felt shallow, meaningless, a mask that could never replace the reality he had abandoned. By the time he reached Ethan's office, his hands were shaking, not from anger or frustration, but from the hollow weight of guilt pressing against his chest. He had expected confrontation, advice, maybe sympathy, but Ethan met him with calm precision, a man whose life intersected with Zora's in ways Alaric could not begin to comprehend. "I ruined her," Alaric whispered, his voice hollow, almost broken. Ethan's response was blunt, unwavering. "No, you lost her." The words cut sharper than any insult could. They weren't meant to shame, they simply stated a truth he had refused to face. He had not ruined Zora. He had walked away, abdicated responsibility, and allowed her to survive without him. Losing her was entirely his doing. For weeks, Alaric replayed the events in his mind. The hospital room, the flames, the envelope containing the money he had given her, the quiet dignity in her refusal to beg. Each memory pressed like a hammer against his chest. He saw her scars again and again, felt the heat of the fire, the fear, the resilience. She had survived, rebuilt, and he had no part in it. He began noticing the cracks in the life he had once thought perfect. Boardrooms no longer felt triumphant, they felt hollow. The applause of investors, the clinking of champagne glasses, the praise of the media, all of it rang false. Each sleepless night reminded him that transformation wasn't bought with wealth. It wasn't a headline. It was forged in quiet, unglamorous choices. Alaric began small. Donations made quietly, without fanfare, to organizations that mattered. People who had been overlooked, forgotten, dismissed. He stopped choosing profit over people, small decisions that chipped away at the old version of himself. And yet, the ghost of the hospital room, the echo of Mila's voice, remained relentless. He didn't seek recognition. He didn't announce his actions. They were private, deliberate. A slow attempt to realign his life with values he had abandoned. Every boardroom meeting, every financial decision, every late night call to check on a family member he had ignored became exercises in humility, reminders that transformation was a process, not an event. Alaric began reflecting on what Zora had built. Her studio, her empire, her independence. Everything she had accomplished while he had been absent. Every boardroom she had commanded. Every decision she had made. Every partnership, including Ethan, who had quietly stood beside her. He realized how much of her power had been forged by necessity, by survival, by refusing to rely on him. Sleep came reluctantly. Every night, he replayed the hospital room, the envelope, the melted foundation, the mirror reflecting her scars. Mila standing beside her, fox in hand, asking him silently what kind of man he really was. And he could not answer. He had no right to. Yet, the memory sparked something unexpected. A drive to do better, to earn respect. To become someone who could stand beside Zora, not claim her, not buy her, not control her, but exist in a world where he could be worthy of acknowledgement. He realized for the first time that worthiness had nothing to do with wealth or status. It had everything to do with actions, consistency, and courage. Alaric's routines began to change. Early mornings spent reviewing community programs, late nights ensuring investments prioritized real impact. Weekends spent quietly assisting initiatives without anyone noticing. Each small decision, each thoughtful act, began to reshape his character in ways that money had never achieved. Yet, despite the changes, the memory of Zora and Mila haunted him relentlessly. He imagined her teaching Mila, guiding her, showing her the way to survive, to thrive, to excel. He imagined the laughter, the shared knowledge, the strength they exuded together, a force he had abandoned, and could only watch from the sidelines. One evening, alone in his apartment, he stared at his reflection. He studied his own eyes, searching for the man he was becoming. The man he had once been would have bought apologies, used money, wielded charm. But he saw a man who had begun to understand humility, responsibility, and quiet strength. He felt fragile, exposed, but also alive. Ethan's words echoed in his mind. "You lost her." Those words had stung at first, but now they guided him. They reminded him that transformation was not about reclaiming what was lost. It was about becoming someone capable of respect, trust, and genuine redemption, even if the person you wanted to reach was beyond your grasp. Alaric's transformation did not arrive in speeches, in grand gestures, or in public acknowledgement. It came in sleepless nights, in careful reflection, in choosing people over profit, compassion over ego. Every day, he measured progress not by wealth or reputation, but by small acts that demonstrated he could be more than the man who had abandoned Zora and Mila. He began to understand the subtle, but powerful truth. Zora had embodied strength was quiet, survival was deliberate, and true power required patience and integrity. Watching from the sidelines, he felt both awe and regret. She had transformed tragedy into triumph. He had merely begun. Boardrooms that once felt like battlegrounds became classrooms in subtle ethics and accountability. Meetings with executives and clients became exercises in listening, in empathy, in considering the human impact of decisions. Each success felt different, more meaningful, more personal. Alaric began documenting quietly, a journal of choices, reminders of lessons learned, reflections on mistakes, and observations of the quiet, unwavering strength Zora displayed every time he recalled her image. It became a private record of change, a testament to the man he hoped he could one day become. And yet, he knew that transformation alone would not restore what he had lost. The bond, the trust, the presence he had abandoned. It could not be reclaimed with self-improvement alone. It would require action, courage, and the willingness to face the consequences of absence, mistakes, and failure. Every night, he revisited the hospital room in his mind. He replayed Mila's small question, her piercing blue eyes, the seriousness in her voice. He felt the weight of accountability settle heavier each day, pressing him toward choices he could not ignore. Alaric began to see subtle changes in himself, less arrogance, more reflection, more thoughtfulness in interactions. His anger at the world diminished, replaced by an understanding that power, without responsibility, was empty. He started reaching out to people he had ignored or mistreated, asking questions, listening carefully, learning slowly. The media continued to speculate, tabloids churned, but Alaric no longer responded. He realized that his actions, not headlines, would define him. And he felt a small, uncomfortable thrill at the thought that one day, Zora might notice, not because of fanfare, but because of the genuine change she could recognize. Still, he could not escape the ghost of his mistakes. Every reflection in a window, every glance in a mirror, reminded him of absence, of opportunity squandered, of trust broken. The path forward was uncertain, painful, and demanding. But it was the only path he could take. Alaric's nights became a careful rhythm of reflection and action. He revisited old projects, corrected missteps, quietly contributed to the lives of those affected by his previous negligence. Each act, though small, began to shape him in ways he had never imagined possible. He began to understand the full gravity of Zora's words. Transformation doesn't arrive in speeches. It comes in quiet, invisible acts of courage, patience, and integrity. And as he worked, as he changed, he felt a mixture of hope and fear. Hope that he could become someone worthy. Fear that it might never be enough. Alaric realized the first step had been acknowledgement, the hardest step, acceptance of his failure, recognition of the consequences of absence. Only after that could he begin to act. He also realized that change was not linear. There were days when old habits, old arrogance, old guilt threatened to overwhelm him. But each time, he paused, reflected, and reminded himself of the hospital room, the melted foundation, the scars, and Mila's piercing eyes. Slowly, deliberately, Alaric began reconstructing his life. Not wealth, not status, not control, but principles. Empathy, responsibility, patience, integrity, humility, strength. And even as he rebuilt, he could feel the shadow of the past lingering, the hospital room, the envelope, Zora's refusal to beg, Ethan's quiet presence, the child who had judged him before he could speak. Alaric could not undo what had been lost. He could only become someone capable of respect, trust, and perhaps, one day, worthy of her notice again. One evening, as he quietly left a donation at a children's hospital, a small voice called out from behind. "Mr. Sterling." He froze. Turning slowly, he saw Mila, fox in hand, standing at the entrance, eyes wide and unflinching. And he realized this encounter would test everything he had learned. Alaric walked away from the studio, his shoulders heavy, each step echoing through the quiet streets like the final toll of a bell he had ignored for years. He didn't glance back. The glass that separated him from Zora and Mila reflected the city lights, casting shadows that stretched long and distorted across the sidewalk. Each shadow seemed to weigh him down, pressing the reality of what he had lost into his chest. He felt the absence of leverage, of control, of pride. The man who had once believed money and charm could solve everything now carried only the intangible weight of consequence. Loss, yes, but something deeper, something unshakable: recognition. Recognition that life had moved on without him, and in moving it had flourished. Behind the glass, Zora cradled Mila, her head tilted so the little girl's curls rested softly against her shoulder. The scars on her face caught the fading light, silver and jagged, reminders of fire, survival, and resilience. They were no longer flaws. They were medals. Every line told a story of courage, every jagged edge proof that she had endured, transformed, and triumphed. Mila whispered softly into her mother's ear, "Do you think he'll come back?" Zora chuckled, a low, melodic sound that carried both authority and warmth. She kissed Mila's forehead. "Maybe. But that doesn't matter, baby. The world doesn't wait for people who left it behind. We keep moving." The studio was quiet now, bathed in warm light that reflected off the polished floors and sleek marble surfaces. Every corner spoke of deliberate intention, of a life carefully constructed by a woman who refused to be victimized. Her empire, her independence, her triumph, every inch of it bore her signature, and she was complete. Alaric stopped several blocks away, leaning against the cool wall of a building. He didn't want to intrude, didn't want to disrupt the life that had grown in his absence. Yet he couldn't stop the ache in his chest, the ghost of curiosity. The pull of a life he had abandoned. He replayed the last moments in the studio over and over. Mila's voice, sharp and innocent, accusing and truthful. "If you want to play, Daddy, you have to catch me first." That sentence echoed relentlessly, a challenge and a revelation. He thought of Zora's unwavering gaze, her calm authority, the way she had refused to be manipulated, bribed, or pitied. She had risen from the ashes of a life he had nearly destroyed, and built something he could only watch from a distance. She was a queen, fully sovereign in her life, and he was merely a witness to it. He remembered Chloe's face, twisted in frustration and disbelief. How quickly her presence had vanished in the face of authenticity and courage. How hollow entitlement looked compared to strength earned through survival. The contrast struck him harder than any public scandal or media headline could. Alaric realized then that he had been chasing illusions his entire life. Status, control, recognition, image. But Zora had never needed any of it. She had never sought validation through wealth or title. She had rebuilt herself, not for him, not for anyone, but for her daughter and for herself. Mila shifted in Zora's arms, Fox clutched tightly. Her eyes sparkled, bright and fearless. "Mummy, can I show him my drawing?" she asked, holding up a crumpled piece of paper. Zora laughed softly. "Show it to me first, baby. Then we'll see." Mila beamed, eager for her mother's attention, not for Alaric's approval. And in that moment, Alaric realized that love had been redefined. It wasn't his to command. It wasn't his to reclaim. It existed fully, entirely, independent of him. He thought of the nights he had spent replaying the hospital room, the melted foundation, the scars, the blue eyes that mirrored his own. Every memory now carried a new weight, an understanding that his absence had not diminished her, had not stopped her. It had only strengthened her resolve. He had imagined confrontation, redemption, reconciliation. Now, he understood that true redemption was not about reclaiming what was lost. It was about becoming worthy, about living a life that could coexist with the lives he had wronged. And for the first time, he saw the path clearly, even if the destination remained uncertain. Zora set Mila down gently. The little girl's tiny hands clutched her mother's skirt as she ran a finger along the scars, tracing them curiously, without fear. "They're like a lightning mark," she whispered, awed. "You're strong, Mommy." Zora smiled, lifting her chin, the fire of her spirit evident in every line of her body. "Yes, baby. Strong. We're strong. Always." Alaric exhaled, unseen, unnoticed. He could only watch. He couldn't touch, couldn't speak, couldn't rewrite the past. But he could carry the lesson with him. The streets were empty now, the city lights casting long, thin shadows. He walked slowly, each step deliberate. Each step a reminder of the life he had to reconstruct within himself, a life built on humility, empathy, responsibility, and quiet courage. He remembered Ethan's words from weeks ago. "You lost her." He understood them fully now, not as blame, but as fact. And with that acceptance, a strange calm began to settle over him. He would never erase the past, but he could shape the future. Back inside, Zora settled Mila onto the couch. The little girl's eyes were wide with curiosity and wonder. "Mummy, do you think he'll try to come back?" Zora wrapped her arm around Mila's shoulders. "Maybe, but he doesn't get to define our story. Our story is ours, always." Mila smiled, small and fierce, understanding the power in those words. Her mother had built a kingdom from ashes, and she was heir not to wealth, but to courage, to independence, to unshakable strength. Alaric passed a cafe on the corner. He paused, looking back at the studio through the fog glass. He didn't knock. He didn't call. He didn't enter. He had learned that some doors, once closed, stay that way, and that sometimes strength is shown not by opening doors, but by walking away with dignity, carrying lessons heavier than regret. Zora glanced around her studio, at the empire she had built. Every tool, every certificate, every photograph reflected not just talent, but resilience. The fire hadn't broken her, it had forged her. She was whole. Mila climbed onto the counter beside her, Fox clutched tight. "I like it here, Mommy," she whispered. "I like our world." Zora kissed the top of her daughter's head. "Me too, baby. Me too." Alaric disappeared into the night, a shadow among the streets, his steps quieter, slower, more deliberate. He carried with him a new understanding: loss could be transformative. Absence could teach. Mistakes could guide. And redemption was earned quietly, without fanfare. Zora looked at Mila and then at the mirror. Her reflection showed scars, silver and jagged, proof of survival, proof of courage, proof of triumph. She smiled. She had lived. She had won. She was a queen in every sense. And she didn't need him to prove it. Her empire glowed behind her. Her past stayed outside. She was whole. Mila hugged her tightly, small arms holding all the love Zora needed. And in that embrace the world felt right, complete, unshakable. Alaric, miles away, felt the weight of absence settle on his shoulders. He had learned the hardest lesson of all. Some victories could not be claimed. Some people could not be bought back. And some love, once grown independently, could not be undone. The city slept, indifferent to their story. But in the quiet, Zora and Mila's world burned bright, alive, and unstoppable. Mila looked up at Zora, eyes bright. "Mummy, what if he comes back tomorrow?" Zora smiled softly, placing her hand over her daughter's heart. "Then we'll greet him as ourselves. Strong, whole, unshakable. And he'll have to decide if he's ready to meet us as equals." Outside, Alaric paused on the street, staring at the glowing studio from afar, realizing that the next step, if it came, would demand more than wealth, charm, or regret. It would demand truth, courage, and a transformation he could barely imagine. And with that, the night held its breath.